here at Virginia Tech. Students for Cultivating Change is an organization, it's a national organization, which advocates and educates for LGBTQ plus individuals in agriculture, natural resources, and beyond. And we're actually the second collegiate chapter in the United States, which is something we're very proud of. We've been around for 2 years now, and we're going stronger than ever. And many other collegiate chapters are in the works. So again, thank you all for coming, and now I'm going to introduce Dr. Goyne. Dr. Goyne is here on behalf of the College of Natural Resources and Environment.
Thank you. Good evening. So it's really my honor to serve as the Associate Dean for the College of Natural Resources and Environment. I've been on campus a total of 7 weeks, so I'm still learning all the acronyms and where places are located at, so bear with me. But on behalf of CNRE, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you in the audience tonight, and to Mr. Looney as well. Really appreciate you being here. And I want to thank you for attending tonight's event. Mr. Looney has a very interesting and compelling story that needs to be told and it needs to be heard. And I have no doubt that all of us are going to be learning from him as we go through the night. But I urge you not to let your learning stop after tonight's presentation. Take time tonight, take time tomorrow to reflect on Mr. Looney's words and his message. Pause to think about how you can continue to develop yourself and how you can continue to develop those who are around you. And then importantly, take action. Engage in additional educational events and activities that promote and embrace the value of diversity and further development of an inclusive society. So thank you and enjoy tonight's presentation.
And we have one more introduction. It's going to be from Mr. Winston, who is on behalf of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences.
Thank you, Taylor. I am honored to introduce tonight's speaker for you, Nate Looney. But first, I want to take a moment to extend an invitation to all the members of our caucuses across campus for faculty and staff. You are invited to a reception tomorrow at 4 o'clock at the Malcolm Rosenberg Hillel Center located at 710 Toms Creek Road in Blacksburg. And this is going to be an opportunity, sort of at Nate's request, to continue this conversation from tonight. Now back to our program. You know, food plays an important role in bringing people together. Please note that there will be a dessert reception following tonight's presentation. Tonight's program and other events this week came about because of a casual lunchtime conversation in Des Moines, Iowa. That happened last June. I was attending the 4th annual Cultivating Change Summit, and earlier that day I'd heard a power talk by our speaker. At lunchtime I told Nate how much I enjoyed learning about his personal journey, and originally asked him if he would be willing to share his story with us or with our students via Skype or whatever the technology of the moment was. And he said that he would be glad to do that. However, after returning to campus and sharing our encounter with students for Cultivating Change and others, everyone said that we should just find the funding to bring Nate to campus. Well, here we are 8 months later. Our cup overflowed. Many amazing partners have made this night and this week possible. Now, Nate arrived last night after taking an unexpected journey to Lynchburg. He's going to be kept very busy at Virginia Tech through Wednesday, and then he's going to travel to Virginia State University on Thursday to share his story there before finally heading back home to LA on Friday. So Nate is the CEO and owner of Westside Urban Gardens in Los Angeles, California. He has an amazing story to share with you. I'm not going to ruin that by telling you too much more about it. The title of his presentation is Transformative Perspectives in Agriculture, a Personal Narrative. Let's give a warm, hokey hello and welcome to Nate Looney.
All right, it's on. Thank you all for being here, first and foremost. It's definitely an honor to be here, and I value your time, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I've heard that some of you are in the midst of getting into midterm time, so the fact that you're willing to spend your time here versus sleeping or studying is important. It doesn't fall on deaf ears. So, what's transformative about agriculture? By its very nature, agriculture is transformative. If a seed were to stay just as a seed, a lot of people would be out of business, and there'd be a few less people on this planet. In applying the lessons of our forefathers from agriculture and modifying growing techniques, we're able to innovate. And through that innovation, there's constant transformation. If we grew the same way now that we grew 200 years ago and left it that way, we would have a problem because our demands and our needs are not the same as they were 200 years ago. So just by the nature of what it is, agriculture is transformational. Now, something else that's interesting about agriculture is you get to buck the stereotypes. You know, what do we think about when you think about a farmer today? You know, maybe mud tires, somebody with a dip in their lip, cowboy boots, you know, maybe they might have a MAGA hat on, maybe they're doing monocrop. Perhaps that you look at that person as uneducated, or you look at them as simple or unable to do something differently because they've chose the path of farming. But, you know, look at me. I'm not a cisgender, straight, white male. I'm Jewish. I'm an Army veteran. And somehow, I'm still a farmer. And I'm not in a rural environment. What does that say about stereotype? I have my own preconceived notions about becoming a farmer in some ways, because when I was a freshman in high school, that's when Matthew Shepard was murdered. So from a very early time, I understood that my body being in the form that it is presented a threat to the world and a danger to myself. But that's still, as I go on, you'll realize that didn't stop me. I come from a long line of farmers. I'm a fifth-generation farmer, proud fifth-generation farmer. My grandmother's grandfather, Horace Hill, started our family farm in Louisiana, northern Louisiana. And what made him different than others is that he wasn't a sharecropper. Our family farm was started as a homestead. And when we talk about Black History Month, we often stop at the transatlantic slave trade, or we stop with the negative sides of the civil rights movement. We don't look at some of the innovation that was happening all throughout America for African Americans. My grandmother's grandfather had a rain catchment silo on the side of the house. Our family farm was the first one to have electricity in the area, the first Black home to have electricity in the area, the first one to have plumbing in the area. They were the first house to have a radio in that area. So what does innovation look like 100 years ago versus innovation today? And it's interesting to think that, he was somebody that didn't just innovate in that way, but he had the vision of seeing that he was trying to create a legacy for his family. So the land that he chose to clear and homestead, it wasn't the best piece of land. It was a swamp, and it was full of trees. So what did Horace Hill have to do? He had to drain the swamp and cut all the trees for 240 acres before it was land that could be farmed. That takes some sort of innovation and foresight. That, when I think of Black History Month, that is what I think about. Not necessarily what we learn in the school books in grade school. He also made it a point that everybody on his land had a job. It didn't matter who you were, you had a job, you had value, you worked. So even the cousin with one arm, he was in charge of the mule. My grandmother tells me that cousin was in charge of the mules. His job was to make sure the mules were fed and watered, the horses were fed and watered, and he took great pleasure in that being his job because he was important and he had a role. And even though Horace Hill was the first African American in that area to own a car, he still preferred to ride his horse all the time. And because he wasn't a sharecropper, he had the respect of the white community in that area, which says a lot because when you go up there even now, it just has that feeling of strange fruit. You know what I mean? So I wanted to evoke that sort of image because it is Black History Month and it's not just slavery. You know, there's more to being an African American in this country. And when you think about history, it should make you feel good. It should make you feel empowered. It should make you feel strong to move forward. If I focused my narrative of being an African American solely on the fact that my ancestors were stolen from their land and brought here, where is my strength in that? That makes me a victim. It doesn't work. There are so many nuggets like this in the U.S. that we have to think about. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I've always farmed. I'm going to get into that shortly, but I haven't. So the question then becomes, how am I Jewish? This doesn't make sense either. Now, public service announcement, none of you guys should ask a Jew of color, so, how are you Jewish? Is your mother Jewish? Or did you convert? If you can imagine that is a question that a Jew of color gets multiple times a day, every single day, it's very hard for us to be polite in answering that question. Now I want you to think to yourself, before you go to ask a Jew of color that question, ask yourself, would I ask a European Jew this question in this same way? Or am I only asking this question because of the color of this person's skin and how they present? The Jewish diaspora is more than just European Jewry. So, 13 years old, I'm a precocious kid. I decide that, wait a minute. So if I come from slaves, and slaves, when they were brought from Africa, didn't practice Christianity, why do I have to practice Christianity? That doesn't make any sense. If this was a religion that was forced upon my people, then I have freedom to choose whatever religion I want. So I ended up with Judaism because I found it for myself, it was a religion where it was okay to struggle with questions and struggle with not having all the answers. And it's totally okay to disagree with each other and find love in that struggle. And there's very often a joke that 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And that is okay. So I started my conversion my process of practicing Judaism when I was 13. And I would say that the most consistent thing in my life to this day is my Judaism. Of everything else that's shifted, that's changed from military to everything else, the one thing that has remained firm is my faith in my religion. And it's interesting because you don't think about being a Jew and being a farmer. Stereotypes, right? So it's interesting that I'm here speaking this week because the Torah portion, the Parsha for the week, is Ki Titzah. And in that Parsha, in that portion for the week that Jews all over the world are reading, it specifically talks about how you should treat your land and the agrarian aspects of it. So we're talking about something where you have a responsibility as a farmer to leave the corners of your field for the poor, for the needy, for the orphan. And that's in this portion that's being read this week. You have an obligation to do something called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is healing the world. So you have an obligation to do what you can to make the world a better place. And as a farmer, that means using sustainable agriculture, using methods that are actually helpful for people, creating nutrient food sources versus just creating something to throw on a shelf. So in a lot of ways, my Judaism interweaves in that. You know, it has a lot to do with paying a living wage to employees and paying them on time. It's related to using accurate weights and measures. All of these things that are sort of philosophically part of religion, for me, really come into my everyday actuality of how I move through my business and how I engage with the world. So, we talked about being African American, talked about being a Jew of color. This year at the Women's March, there was a large contingents of Jews of color, female Jews of color, and it was powerful, because it's powerful when you speak existence to something that people tell you does not exist. So I graduated high school at 17 and went to San Francisco State University, and get there, and I'm going to school, first year of school, and I'm bored. I don't want to stay. It's not appealing to me. I want to go play warfighter. This is 2003. The war has just kicked off. I'm a complete hypocrite because I got arrested the day the war broke out, protesting the war. I will be completely transparent with that. I don't know how much of it was following the crowd versus my own development at that time, but I did. I joined the Army specifically because I wanted to go into law enforcement, and at 18 years old, I was not old enough to carry a weapon and work for Oakland Police Department. So the best thing for me to do is go park myself as a military police soldier until I was old enough to carry a weapon. And that sort of changed my life in a lot of ways, most for the better. During my 8 years in the Army, I was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina. I rode out the storm in the lower 9th Ward at Jackson Barracks. After we cleared out Jackson Barracks, we went to the Superdome, and I was in the Superdome until we cleared out the Superdome. And then after we cleared out the Superdome, we had to go over to the Convention Center and clear out the Convention Center and lock down the city and get everybody out, make the city safe. And once we did that, it wasn't enough because Hurricane Rita was right around the corner. So I rode through Hurricane Rita in the eye of the storm through Opelousas, Louisiana to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where we did rescue humanitarian missions in Lake Charles, Louisiana. After which, the governor called us back to New Orleans to patrol for another 2 years in the city, helping New Orleans Police Department with their law enforcement mission. So after that, I took about 2 months and came to LA, and then went to Iraq for a year. And my year in Iraq, I'd say that is probably easier than being in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina. Because when you go into the military, you expect to go fight a foreign war. You expect to see hardship on other soils. It's something else when you are seeing people that look like you suffering. It's a different beast, and it changed how I view a lot of things. But that was a very interesting thing. But the thing is, when I served in the military, I was still female. I couldn't transition until I left the military, and it was a very hard decision to leave. When I was in the military, I made rank very fast. I went from E1, I believe, to E5 in about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. My buddy Pig can clarify that for me if I'm wrong when I see him. But I made rank very fast because I enjoyed what I did. I enjoyed being in uniform. I enjoyed being a hard charger. But I knew that I wasn't being my authentic self. That who I was, even though I had short hair and was openly dating women at the time, my unit, hats off to them too, turned a blind eye. Don't ask, don't tell, for some reason didn't apply to me when I was in, and I'm very grateful for that. But I knew that I needed to transition, that who I was living as wasn't who I really was. And so in order to do that, I needed to leave the military. And when I got ready to leave, I was really lucky that the JAG officers said, we're not going to discharge you with a medical discharge, because if the laws change, you won't be able to come back under a medical discharge. What we'll do is give you a hardship discharge. It's an honorable discharge, but if the laws ever change and you want to come back, we got a place for you. So I left the military and decided that the next step is to step out and start my career. And before doing that, I needed to finish my college degree. You know, I bounced around and did schooling in a lot of different places, but hadn't finished. So I got accepted to American Jewish University, and as a business student, in order to finish my degree. In my junior year, when I was trying to figure out what am I going to do next, am I going to go to grad school? Am I going to, go work for some corporate company? What am I going to do next? I realized that I didn't want to take on additional debt for a grad program because for me in my financial situation, that wasn't going to work. And in addition, I didn't feel like I had a comfortable guarantee that I would be able to recoup my money. There's only so long you want to be eating beans and rice beyond a certain age. And so what I ended up doing after graduation was start my own business. So junior year, I figured out Westside Urban Gardens is the company that I'm going to create. I'd literally be sitting in classes working on my logo design while listening to the professors talk. So by the time I graduated, I had a pretty good idea of what that business was going to look like. The day after I graduated, I filed for the LLC for Westside Urban Gardens. And the thing is, I did it backwards again because I didn't know how to farm yet. So I got this farming company that I'm creating, and it's a name only, but I don't know what I'm doing. I've been watching YouTube videos. I turned part of my bedroom into my mobile indoor lab, and I had fish and my aquaponics system starting to come up, but I didn't have the skills to grow on a commercial level. So I reached out to an organization in Denver called Veterans to Farmers. And they, at the time, were offering a 6-week controlled environment agricultural course for veterans to take, and they would give you an additional stipend while you were in the program. And so I got into the program. Y'all, this is funny. I get into the program 2 days before it starts, and I have no place to stay in Denver. Hardly know anybody out there, but I know that this is what I'm going to do. So at the time, I had like a 2-door car. I pack up everything in my truck, and because I'm a veteran, I get free camping at local parks. So I pack my camping gear in my car, get in the car, hit the road, and I'm like, you know what? I can stay in a tent nearby until I figure out something more stable. And if I don't figure out anything stable, hey, it's free. I can stay in this tent. But I knew that what I was going there for was the most important thing. It was more important than finding a place to stay was getting the education that I was going to get from that program. So fast forward, I finished that program, come back to LA, and then aquaponics program opens up. And for me, I really wanted to do aquaponics more than I wanted to do hydroponics, but it wasn't offered for veterans to farmers at the time. And so Farmer Veteran Coalition was offering an aquaponic opportunity, internship opportunity at a farm called Ouroboros Aquaponic Farms in Half Moon Bay, California. So I applied and was great. Luckily was accepted to the 3-month program. And that was one of the best things that could have happened because it allowed you to be on site and really work with the plants and really get confident in what it would be like to operate a commercial farm on my own. Because I could go to the owner, I could go to Ken and say, well, we just had this big problem where all of our fish feed has been invaded by rats. So does that mean that counts as a business loss that you can mark on your taxes, or can you file insurance on this? Because each bag of food costs $100. We just lost 23 bags of food. What can we? So the fact that I could actually be able to answer those sorts of questions, it was probably one of the best decisions that I made. So I come back from that program. I come home and I say, okay, I know I'm going to start a commercial aquaponics farm. By the very nature of an aquaponics farm, it requires a lot of infrastructure to start up. Not only do you have to buy the fish, but you have to have all of the support systems to keep those fish alive and keep your whole system moving while still being able to afford employees to help you run it and the equipment to get your food to market. So I already knew that starting out from the beginning, I wasn't willing to start with a $300,000 overhead. So I bootstrapped it, and it was building backyard farms for people. What I do is I go to someone's house and say, okay, you want to build a garden? Great. I'll build that garden for you for a fee. Oh, you don't know how to farm? That's fine. I'm going to teach you how to farm that for a fee. You're going to go out of town. Oh, you have to go out of town for a month? Cool. For a fee, I will take care of your garden, and the day that you come home, I will have a bag harvested right at your doorstep. So, because you've been gone for a month, so you need groceries. Well, I will take care of that too. So I looked for the need and sort of tried to fulfill that need in Los Angeles. Something that sort of helped me was we were in the middle of a drought, and the city of Los Angeles was allowing you to tear up your yard, and it was like $2 per square foot. And if you tore up your yard and put in drought-tolerant crop or drought-tolerant landscape, the city would give you money. So that was my reason to go knock on the door. Like, hey, did you know you can get $2 per square foot of your yard if you take that out and put what I'm putting in? So that's kind of how I got to my next level. The next level beyond that was crowdfunding and starting a commercial farm in Anaheim, California, growing specifically microgreens hydroponically. And with that, it presented its own challenges. Growing microgreens, some of the best things about growing microgreens is it's a fast-growing crop, it requires minimal space, and it's a very high-value crop. So I didn't need a lot of space to get things going and get into the markets, but the momentum was needed. My first market, it was the Irvine Farmers Market. I made $61, and that was a 12-hour day. And then of that, 15% had to go to, was my split to the greenhouse. I had another 5% that was going to the farmer's market just for them to allow me to be in the market. By the time everything was said and done and I had bought the containers for the microgreens to go in, I was in the negative. But that was the first market that I was in. Within 8 months, I was in 5 of the major markets in the Los Angeles area. I was in the Venice Farmers Market, the Beverly Hills Farmers Market, Santa Monica Wednesday Farmers Market, La Cienega Farmers Market, and Culver City's Farmers Market. I was working. I was hustling. I was working about 80 hours a week. To go from the farmers market to my farm, it was about a 35-mile difference. So I was spending about 24 hours a week just commuting back and forth to my farm to get my crops as a sole business operator. And as interesting as it was, and as great as it was, and as much as I loved the hustle, I realized that that wasn't going to be sustainable in the long term. Because even though in name it's successful, I've been able in this short period of time to get myself into all these really hard target markets to get into. The numbers weren't adding up for me. And the amount of strain that I was going to have to put on my body, and by the calculations that I made of how long it would take for things to actually turn, it wasn't going to make sense for me to keep on that path. So one of the smartest things I could have done was shut it down. And I shut it down understanding that I'm doing this so that I could reopen it in a better way. And so what does that look like today? Today I do consulting, and I also build aquaponics, bespoke aquaponics systems. So for example, I just finished constructing a system at a marketing company in Los Angeles called The Confluence. And that system is an indoor aquaponics system on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles. And so it's probably one of the most fun I've had working on a project in a long time. But can you talk about risk and liability when you're talking about 1,000 gallons of water consistently moving through multiple systems and multiple tanks on the 4th floor of an office building, and then throw some fish into it on top of that? So it was definitely an interesting project to work on. One other thing that I'm working on right now is helping a startup called In-House Produce. And what In-House Produce does is they've taken the idea of farm to table and just hacked it. So instead of farm to table being miles, we're talking feet. So what they do is they bring the farms to the restaurant and install microgreen farms in restaurants. And for a fee, they will service it every month. But now the chef can just harvest what they want on site, as much as they want on site. And the math works out better that the chef or the restaurant's saving a little bit of money by using these systems. So no longer am I driving back and forth to Anaheim working in a greenhouse that's 130 degrees, on a good day. Now I'm able to do a little bit more. But the thing that I want to touch on that's probably the hardest for me, or the hardest part of every aspect of my identity was being trans and being a trans farmer and being a trans religious Jewish farmer. And before I transitioned, when I was a lesbian, or identified as a lesbian and a woman, I was out. I didn't feel like I had to be in the closet because I was like, screw you, who are you to say anything to me? But when I transitioned, the stakes instantly felt higher. It was almost like, because I'm changing my gender, because you look at me, and before I transitioned, you saw a lesbian. Now that I've transitioned, it was almost like, in order for me to survive, I had to revert back into a closet that I was never in the first place. Because now I'm in an industry where the stereotype is very anti anything other than cisgender, male, female. And so for me, and then on top of that, the fact that I was a veteran, when you think about veterans, given our current climate of how trans people are being viewed in the military, how can I come out and be an out trans veteran farmer if two of those identifying factors are incongruent with being trans? It was very hard. So what I ended up doing is, in a lot of ways, not speaking about the fact that I was transgender at all in any sort of way in my life. It wouldn't even come out my mouth that I was trans, because I saw it as a liability, and I saw that if I was vocal about transitioning, doors would close before they even had the chance to open. And what I've realized is, and why I'm able to speak to you guys today about it, is I realize that I have an obligation, in the same way that anyone with privilege has an obligation. And my obligation is to be out and be open, because I can move through the world without people knowing. And because people look at me and they don't see any different, as they shouldn't, because we are all the same and all bleed the same color. We're all made of the same type of meat. But, I have an obligation, because there are other trans folks that are coming after me that need to see somebody else that's out there for them, that we do exist. And it's not easy. It's not easy to openly come before people and be like, hey, I'm a trans dude. Because in my everyday life, there are veteran farmers that did not know that I was trans, that knew me for years and did not know I was trans until they heard me speak one time. And they were like, dude, I would have never known. If you didn't say anything, I would have never known. But then the conversation then goes, well, now that you do know, what changes about how you see trans people? And they're like, well, my stereotype of what a trans person was this. But I see you hustle. I see you building this business. I see you as a not take shit from anybody type person. So who I see as being trans is no longer who it actually is. But what ended up happening by coming out and being more out and open about being trans is the farmer, veteran, every part of my identity started to weave together in a way that made sense. And there became harmony. Because I realized that my seeds don't give a shit if I'm trans. All they care about is water, sun, nutrients. And in the markets, whoever's buying from me, they don't care. They want to know, it's Los Angeles, okay? They want to know where the seeds came from. Was it sustainable? Was the water treated properly? Did the greenhouse have proper coating? These are the things that they care about. They don't care about me. I mean, they care about the fact that I'm a veteran, but outside of that identity, all they care about is the quality of the product. And so what I want to kind of close with is some of the things that I've learned that I feel kind of translate to everybody. And one of those things is that what I've learned through operating my business and everything up until this point is that real success is in the process. Not always in the results, but it's in the process. So what that means is it's in the consistency. It's in being consistent. It's in showing up every day, even if you don't want to, even though it feels like you're not getting anywhere. It's forward motion, even when you're against all odds. Consistent forward motion, even when you're against all odds. And I feel like I found myself at the intersection of intersectionality. So my advice to any of you is if you ever feel lost or alone or isolated, because when you're holding this many identities, you can look at the world and say, there is nobody like me. Nobody is going to understand my perspective. The opposite is true. What actually happens is because you intersect so many identities, you can understand so much and understand everybody else's situation. And you're not alone because we are all in this collective situation together. So what I would say to you is when you find yourself at the intersection of intersectionality, go up. Thank you for your time.
We have some time now for
Oh,
questions.
question, yes, question. I almost forgot about you guys. See, look at that. Got on the roll. I would love to answer questions.
We'll bring the microphone to you, yeah, if you have a question, that's why I'm here, not.
Oh, so if you have a question, the microphone.
I was being respectful. I thought they were going for the. I did have a question. You mentioned how you overcame being transgender, how you realized no one was caring about that it's the product. But I did have a question when you initially took that transition. Did you regret it when you felt like you were closeted, especially when you were so free in being who you were as a lesbian? Did it make you regret it for a moment? And then if so, how did you push through that?
I don't think I regretted it, but it confused me because I didn't understand of like how could I go from being so out and open to feeling the need to be so insular and isolated. I knew in my heart of hearts that transitioning was the right decision for me, but I just couldn't reconcile how all of the new things that were a part of my identity worked with being trans and being trans in the world. Yes, in the back. Is it on?
Check,
Yeah,
check,
I'm
check,
loud.
check. Really close to me.
You have it. Okay, so my question is during that time when you were hanging out in the tent, kind of metaphorically and physically, like sowing the seeds of like your business, how did you deal with like the self-doubt that you could lose potentially everything, or like that you weighing such a heavy wager? You just seem so like gung-ho confident about it, and I'm just interested about if you had any level of doubt about what would happen next if something didn't work.
That's a good question. You know, it's easy to have doubt when you have something to lose. I looked at it like I had nothing to lose. You know, what was the alternative to doing what I was doing? Maybe working for somebody else or taking a job that I knew for me was going to feel soul-sucking. I had no other choice, you know. And I'm not somebody that's of a very financially secure background, so it didn't mean anything to me to be sleeping in a tent. You know, when I was a kid, there were times where, you know, we didn't have hot water or electricity, you know. So what is a little bit of sacrifice in the temporary if in the long term it's going to lead to a greater good for me?
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about how and where you found community as 13-year-old who was interested in converting to Judaism, and where you were at the time?
So I was in Los Angeles, and it's very interesting because I had a friend. I went to middle school in near Westwood, and there's a large Iranian Jewish population in that area, and those were a lot of my friends were Iranian Jews at the time, and it was actually kind of through a conversation with one of my friends that was Jewish. And we were talking about religion, and I related what I've related to you guys about not finding, Christianity jiving with me. And I just said, I just don't have any religion. I don't have a religion. His response was like, no, you have to have a religion. I was like, no, I don't. And he's like, everybody has to have a religion. You have to have a religion. I was like, no, I don't. I'm cool with it. He was like, well, be Jewish. And I was like, I'm black. There's no such thing as a black Jew. He was like, I don't care, be Jewish. You have to have a religion. And so, we went back and forth, and I ended up going home like, yeah, I'm not going to be Jewish. But knowing myself, I went home and did research because I realized I didn't know anything about Judaism. And the more I read, the more my interest started to evolve, and the more I started to delve deeper into, being in community. So, for example, at my high school, Chabad came to the Jewish club every Friday. And so there was that sort of interaction. Once I graduated high school, that's when I started going to synagogue and shuls more consistently on my own.
Yeah, I'm curious about the aquaponics. That back in the 80s, there was a group up in New England called the New Alchemists.
Okay.
New Alchemy Institute, and they had fish tanks, and they processed the waste. And maybe you could tell me what your system is like. I guess what the modern version is.
Sure. So right now I don't personally have a system, but the systems that I build. So to take a step back, aquaponics is a technique of growing crops, of cultivation, that is water-based. So the plants are grown in water versus grown directly in soil. It's a semi-closed loop system, so what that means is the fish live in one tank. The fish excrement goes through a series of a biofilter, and what's left is a nutrient-rich solution with nitrogen, and the plants need that nitrogen. So the plants take up the nitrogen, and that fresh water is cycled back to the fish. You only add water to the system for something called transpiration and evaporation. So the water that's taken up by the plants and the water that you lose through evaporation is the only water that's lost in the system. So it ends up being about 90% less water usage than soil-based growing. In addition to that, aquaponics allows you to grow on a smaller footprint because you can grow crops a lot more densely. For example, on a floating raft, in the floating raft type system, it's a raft that is 2 feet by 4 feet, and on that same raft you can grow 18 heads of lettuce to full size. And they grow in about half the time as they would in soil-based growing. The reason for that is because for plants that are in soil, they have to send out roots for stability to keep the plant upright. But when you're working with aquaponics or hydroponics, you are artificially creating that stability by putting it in a floating raft or putting it in a netting pot system. So the only roots that it sends down is for nutrients. There are probably more ways than I can name of how to grow aquaponically or hydroponically, but the three main ways are DWC, which is a deep water culture, also known as a floating raft. You can grow with media beds using a flood and drain system. And then you can also grow with NFT technique, which is a nutrient film technique, where it looks pretty much like a rain gutter with plants growing in it, and it's just a little bit of water that wicks along the bottom of it. The plants take up what they need, and then the system goes on its way. The system that I just finished building at the Confluence incorporates all three of those in the same system.
So I kind of have a two-part question for you. The first is, why did you choose urban agriculture as opposed to more traditional agriculture? And then, as an urban farmer, what do you think that cities can do to better support their local and urban farmers?
So I chose urban agriculture specifically, one, because I'm in a city in Los Angeles, but also when I was first getting into agriculture, I realized we were in the middle of a drought, and it was one of the most extensive droughts in California at the time. And in doing research, I realized a large portion of the food in our country was coming from the Central Valley in California. So if our old methods of growing crops were very quickly becoming obsolete, something else had to be done. And then as a business student, you know, where there is need, there's opportunity. And so, you know, I saw aquaponics as an industry that was still kind of starting. It's been around, as he was saying, for a long time, but it's really starting to get ground, you know, more recently. And so I was like, okay, aquaponics, urban environments. The needs of the cities, the food needs in our country is shifting. As populations move to more urban environments versus rural environments, the need for food in cities change, in addition to the demand for lower food miles, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where the cost of fuel is significant. So that was kind of what pushed me into that direction. You know, if I ever get bored, I can go down to Louisiana and help my cousins on that farm too, which I plan to do at some point when I get time. But I think what cities can do right now to sort of spearhead that is offer vacant land. So the largest owner of real estate in Los Angeles, of vacant real estate, unused real estate in Los Angeles, is the city of Los Angeles. So if we've got this land that's not being used, and you've got a whole generation of new farmers that are cultivating these sort of techniques, that could be the fastest way to sort of spearhead and make that happen. Make the land available, and then make access to funds available. Because we have a situation in our country right now where our farming population is aging out. And as they age out, they need to be replaced. And the only groups of people that are able to do that are veterans and young folks. Now, with young folks, if you've got student loans, it's very difficult to swallow the pill of taking on a farm with the expectation of not really being cash positive for 3 years. So you know, access to funds, access to land, for sure.
Have you ever experienced conflict between your religion and your LGBTQ identity?
Yes. So the only reason why I laugh is because earlier I mentioned this week's Parsha, the Torah portion for this week. And this is also the same portion, this week's portion is the one that says that a man should not wear a woman's clothes, and a woman should not wear a man's clothes, and it is an abomination to Hashem.
Oh, great.
What am I going to do? You know, there are times where it is very difficult to sort of reconcile how can I be religious and then also adhere to something that says that the things that make me me are wrong. And it does create challenges. However, with Judaism, there's room for struggle and there's room for really chewing on the text. In addition to the Torah saying that, there's also commentary that says that it doesn't matter what somebody is, you treat them with dignity and respect. You know, and there's also the sages of old took time to line out what the different categories of gender were. It wasn't just black and white, male and female. There was something called androgynous and something called timtum. And so the fact that the sages of old were actually willing to acknowledge that these things existed, say to me that they were trying to figure it out back then too. So, you know, if after everything's said and done, and the gripes that Hashem, God, has against me are the fact that I'm trans, and you know, the fact that I date women, what do I have? You know, there's nothing that can stop me from living the life that I live. You know, because at the end of the day, this is my journey, and I can't, or better yet, I won't let anyone else dictate what my journey looks like. Is there another question?
I have a question.
Sure.
As a trans man of color, how has that specifically affected your process of getting into the business, and have you had doors really shut in your face for who you are?
I think for a while I felt like the doors would shut in my face, because when I was early on in transition, I had difficulty getting employed. For example, you figure when you come back from Iraq, the streets are paved in gold. You can get a job anywhere. You've got this experience, people want to help veterans. But what happened with me is, because I presented as male, I went to some job interviews, and the person interviewing me would be physically uncomfortable. Or I distinctly remember one job interview I went to where once the guy realized that I was trans, I saw the smile drop from his face, and he just looked disgusted and looked like he wanted to punch me from across the table. But outside of that, operating my business now, I haven't encountered that at all. It was mostly related to early on in my transition. So.
Thank you.
Sure. But what I would like to highlight about that is interesting that you asked me about being a black trans man, is that the highest instance of violence against trans people is against trans women of color. I can't quote the number for last year, and I can't quote the number yet for this year, but it's already ticking up. And in addition to that, the number of trans people that take their own lives, trans people of color that take their own lives, probably every week or every other week I see somebody on my Facebook, I see a post on my Facebook because some teenage kid has taken their life for being trans because they didn't have support. So more than me worrying about my own safety or comfort or whether or not my business thrives, I think about that.
Thank you for being a presence and helping bring forth guiding light to those who struggle right now.
So actually, I have a question. So as in a very cis and white majority business and in majors, what can we do that would make it more inclusive for people who identify as trans or African Americans?
It's a good question. The first thing is to acknowledge when you have a room that doesn't have diversity, that there is something about that. Like if you walk into a room and everybody looks like you, your question should be why. I can't say what it looks like in shifting what happens after that why, but the first question should be why. Because I'll tell you, for me as a trans man of color, when I walk into a business meeting and I'm the only person of color in that room, sometimes my question is, do I deserve to be here? Or should I be in this room? When it should be like, damn, I'm in this room. I should be here. But I think it's mostly related to the fact that, if everything looks normal to you, why would you think any other way? Or why would you think that there needs to be a space at the table? And that doesn't mean just giving a space at the table just because this person fits X, Y, and Z. But if the person with the skills that you need for whatever job that is present, their gender makeup or their racial makeup should not be a factor in the decision whether or not you proceed with working with that person. So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Oh, now the hands are going. Limited resources and demand goes up.
I was wondering, you mentioned being consistent, but personally as a grad student who feels like I'm always in transition, I guess I was wondering how you would work with town to encourage these options for vacant land use. When I feel like I'm just gonna move away, you know, and I really want to work with my community and the people that are in it, no matter where I am, and no matter for how long.
So that becomes a challenge. If you want to work in a community but sort of have like a transient soul, it can be a problem, because when you start any sort of agricultural operation, that's a time investment, and not just time per day, but a long-term time investment. And in order for that community to actually thrive, it needs that presence to really get it off the ground. It's too often that I see community gardens start with good intentions and end with weeds. So that's really what it is. There has to be strong community buy-in, hands down. Because without that, even if you have all the intent in the world, and you go into a community and you build a garden, but you're the only one tending the garden, you step out of the equation or get sick, God forbid, and what happens to the garden? Back there.
So having spoken so highly about your time serving in the military, and then seeing how your customer base really treats you as a veteran first and foremost, do you see a circumstance in which you would go back to active service?
Yes. However, before y'all start clapping, I take into account our current political climate. I would be willing to serve my country again, and I will always be willing to serve my country in the event that it's physically necessary or there's an immediate threat. All bets are out the window. I care for people. But to willingly just go back and say, send me, I need some reassurances from my country that they value my life as much as I'm willing to go out and fight for my country. Once that's met, I'll
One more question.
last one.
So one of my passions is I've worked in the Department of Dairy Science and exposing young people to a major that isn't typically known as growing right now. How do we be mindful of being inclusive in a recruitment in a field that's perceived as the old white man's field? And with that note, how do we make sure that we're sending our students out into a field that would be inclusive to them? Sorry.
Of course, the last one's got to be a real stomper. Well, I would look at your recruitment tactics and look at what are the results that recruitment is currently getting you. If you are looking to have a more inclusive and diverse student population, you have to take a second to see what those potential students would need to see, would need to hear in order to be interested in your program. They may already be interested in dairy sciences, but when they look at your marketing, or if they come for a tour, if the warm and fuzzy they get is going to tell them, or the idea that they get isn't warm and fuzzy, and that they're going to be feeling as an other in that space, they're going to go to HBCU or something like that instead of dealing with Tuskegee here. So I would definitely just sort of reverse engineer your marketing for that. And start with the students and figure out what they need to see and need to hear, and then move forward. Because in the end, once you get them to the table, you're going to teach them what they need to succeed. So, thank you guys. I am so grateful. Thank you to Dave Winston, because without him sitting across the table from me at the Cultivating Change Summit and saying, hey, I want you to do a Zoom, I wouldn't be here with you guys right now 8 months later. So, thank you.
I've been around the university for 2 or 3 years. And I honestly never thought back in the 80s that we would ever be having these conversations. So kudos. We've got a lot of work to be done, but we're starting in the right direction, I think. One of the things that I failed to do when I was up here earlier was to let you know that Dr. Alan Grant, Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, would be concluding our program this evening, so I'm here to introduce him now.
Thank you so much for coming this evening. Nate, wonderful presentation. Thank you for holding in there for the Q&A session. Great questions, and really enjoyed that. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. So Nate's going to have an opportunity to meet with lots of student organizations and other organizations on campus this week, and I think he's going to see how hard everyone really works to work towards this inclusive environment and a good climate on campus. And what's really important in order for us to do that is to have this outside perspective. And Nate, thank you so much for sharing your story, your experiences, being so open and doing that, because it's going to be really beneficial to all of us as we look at ways of continuing to improve the campus climate. So thank you for sharing your story and for being here most of the week, for enduring the trip here last night. It's great to have you with us, and we wish you well as you visit Virginia State University too. So come on back up, because we want to thank you again, and I have a small token of appreciation to present.